All right. Hello, everyone. On behalf of Consumers International, I am delighted to welcome you to this session, Gender Justice in the Shift to Sustainable Lifestyles. This session is part of our overall Sustainable Lifestyle Summit that is held this week to mark World Consumer Rights Day. Consumers International and its members all over the world are focused on very top and important issues for consumers, and we fight for a fair, safe, and sustainable marketplace for all. The Consumers International program on gender and consumer rights engages our members and our partners in campaigns, research, recommendations, and meaningful innovation for consumers. I want to add that this session would not be possible without the tireless efforts of my co-lead, Erico DeMello, who has also contributed enormously to this work. Before we get started with the session, I'm going to walk through a couple of quick housekeeping slides. If we could go to the next slide, Ali. Great. So for this webinar today, interpretation is available in French and in Spanish. If you'd like to access the interpretation, you have to select the More bottom at the bottom of your screen, select interpretation, and then choose the language in which you'd like to hear the content. One of our panelists today will be presenting in Spanish. In order to listen to their version, you can select the interpretation in order to hear what they're saying in English, French, or Spanish. If we could go to the next slide. Great. And there is also the availability of having closed captions. If you need them, you just go to the caption setting and select that, and again, select the speaking language. When speaking for our panelists today, please try to speak clearly and slowly so that our interpreters can do their work. If we can go to the next slide. And then some last ground rules. This session is recorded and attendees must adhere to our event code of conduct. We are going to engage the audience through Slido today. So if you have your phone ready, you can scan this QR code and answer a question that we'll be using today. Now, I'll leave up that for just a moment, but now onto the session where we're going to be talking about gender and sustainable consumption and energy and so many interesting things. Women drive a vast majority of so much consumer purchasing decisions all around the world. There are approximately 350 million female consumers in Africa, and according to the African Report, these women drive over 70% of consumer spending on the continent. Women 55 and older actually have direct control over an estimated 75% of household spending. And despite all of this, the UN guidelines for consumer protection lack specific recommendations when it comes to gender. And this leaves a significant gap in achieving equitable consumer protection, just and sustainable lifestyles. And so frequently we find that policies fail to address gender-specific differences in consumption, which limits access to safe, fair, and sustainable products. If we can better engage half of the world's population, then we can create a more just and sustainable future. With that, I will hand it over to our moderator today, Claudia Vaccarone, who has a wealth of knowledge on gender equity and inclusion. Thanks so much, Claudia. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Erin and Erico and everybody at Consumers International for putting together such a strong program this week for the Sustainable Lifestyle Summit, and also for setting the stage, Erin, so well for this session. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session. I'm Claudia Vaccarone. I'm an inclusion strategy advisor, and I support leaders and teams to gender mainstream their programs and articulate their inclusion strategies. I'm connecting today from Geneva in Switzerland, where I'm based, and I'm delighted to join this important conversation on gender justice in the shift to sustainable lifestyle. We're going to discuss what are the specific gender implications and experiences of consumers, what role can gender disaggregated consumers' insights play in strengthening gender justice, and what policies can make a sustainable marketplace for women. We are excited to have 4 eminent gender experts on this panel. Let me introduce them, and a big welcome to Sascha Gabizon. She is the Executive Director of Women Engage for a Common Future, a Netherlands-based NGO and a network of more than 150 women environmental organizations in 50 countries worldwide. Sascha and the organizations work on national, European, UN, and international political levels with the aim to increase women's influence in political decision-making processes. We then have Claudia Collado, who is the president of the membership-based consumer organizations Adelco in Argentina, and member also of Consumers International. Caroline Hammarstedt Nuss is the senior analyst and gender implementation advisor with the Swedish Consumer Agency. And she's also a member of the UNCTAD Informal Working Group on Consumer Protection and Gender. And finally, last but certainly not least, Marielle Venstra. She's the co-founder and scientific director of 75INQ Institute for Inclusive Energy Transition, based in the Netherlands as well. So thank you all for joining this session. We're going to address a few overarching questions. And the first one being, how do gender roles influence consumption patterns and the adoption of sustainable lifestyle? And in preparation for this session, I was reading an article that came up on The Guardian in 2020, so it's a few years back, introducing the notion of an eco-gender gap. So highlighting some research which indicates that men may perceive sustainable choices as less masculine. And this impacts, of course, their attention and their willingness to adopt green behaviors. And this is due, according to this research and article, to the fact that most eco-friendly products are actually marketed to women. And there are obvious reasons for this. Women, they're not only powerful consumers, as we heard from Erin in the setting of the stage, but also disproportionately responsible still for the domestic sphere, and so for all the purchasing of that type of products. And from a behavioral side, also women have greater tendency to be pro-social, altruistic, empathetic, to display a stronger ethic of care, and to assume a future-focused perspective. So as a consequence, sustainability, green choices have come to be cognitively linked with femininity by both men and women. And that, unfortunately, is partly what puts off men, schematically speaking, from doing their bit. So I'd like to start with Sascha Gabizon, and you're joining us from New York. What have you observed over the years, in your work with Women Engage for a Common Future? Does this resonate with the research and information that you have?
Yes, thank you, Claudia, and hello, everybody. Indeed, I'm logging in from New York. You might hear the ambulances and the typical noise you hear from New York. We're here at the UN Commission on the Status of Women on Women's Rights with a lot of feminist organizations, including our own eco-feminist network, Women Engage for a Common Future. And indeed, we see what you described, that women take a majority of the consumption decisions, and women have more easily adopted some more sustainable consumption patterns. Of course, it's not only because women are the better persons, but it's also very much because of the gender roles with which we grow up, right? That women have indeed been more responsible for care work, more responsible for domestic work. Therefore, have been also very active in things like waste separation, etc. But also, more sustainable mobility patterns, because not only because of willingness, but also because women often did not have access to maybe the one car in the household, which was maybe reserved for the main breadwinner, and then women would have to depend on public transportation, which is more sustainable. So we have seen this historically, that it's between more awareness, also because women are in this position more of caretakers because of the gender roles we have in society. But we see indeed in the last years that this gender gap between also young men and women is becoming bigger, not only in the consumption area, we also see it in the elections. The recent elections, we see more women voting for green parties, young women specifically, and more young men voting for conservative parties. More young women, being interested in purchasing green products or becoming vegan, and more young men maybe being more interested in risky technologies, etc. So this gender gap is very real. It's shown from many studies, and it's very much also maybe influenced because of social media and influencers like the Tate brothers, for example, which we, of course, as feminist organizations are very concerned about this type of, toxic masculinity, pushing for what we would say unsustainable consumption patterns. But also a lot of young women are only starting to find out that a lot of the more typical women's consumption patterns can also be very harmful for the planet. We're looking at textiles and fast fashion, etc. And this is only starting, I think, to become a real big issue for feminist consumers. So what we do in our organization is also to try and really push for better alternatives. For how can we access, fair, sustainable products, and we promote, for example, with our office in France, a program called Ma Maison, Ma Santé, My House, My Health, which looks at how can you avoid toxic chemicals in baby products or in cosmetics or in textiles, clothing, cleaning products, etc. And that's very successful. We do a lot of trainings also for healthcare, first healthcare providers, midwives, etc. Because there's a lack of regulation in this area. We think we are protected by all the EU laws which exist around environmental issues, but we're not. Unfortunately, there are lots of very harmful hormone-disrupting chemicals or forever chemicals which will continue to increase in our bodies for the next generations to come, and which are really not good for our health. So what can you do as a consumer? So there's a lot of educational campaigning work on that. Also, we do a lot of policy advocacy, but also really supporting our local partners to produce the alternatives themselves. So one area is menstrual health. We have been doing a lot of work around this issue. There's a lot of interest from feminist consumers in this topic, not only because menstrual health products are a huge waste problem because of the size, but also because of some of them being containing toxics, or being, depending on the market, having a lot of plastics. And so what are the alternatives? And for example, in North Macedonia, we've partners who have created social enterprises with migrant women and Roma women producing reusable, healthy, non-toxic menstrual health products. And that's really, an area where you can also address justice, the issue of not only climate justice, but also gender justice, because a lot of young women in Eastern Europe, worldwide, but also in Western Europe, might lack access to menstrual health problems. We call that menstrual poverty. So you can, take two steps at the same time. You can help, produce healthier, locally produced menstrual health products, and you can also address this menstrual poverty challenge, which we see face a lot of young women, especially young women in vulnerable situations. So these are some of the projects we work on, but then you still need better policies, right? And I think this will be one of the discussions we'll have with you, Claudia, is what policy changes can help. You can, of course, work with taxes. I think Claudia Calado, who will speak after me, will look at taxes. So reducing value added taxes on, for example, locally produced healthy menstrual products or so, to see them as a basic need, a primary need, and not as a luxury product or so, right? And of course, you can also do things like promoting legislation for women to become producers. And one area is that of electricity. we all want to invest in renewable energy, but often these larger financial decisions are still more taken by men than by women in households, for cars, for investing in solar panels, etc. But now some countries have moved to a prosumer renewable electricity legislation, where you can put 2 small panels, PV panels on your balcony, and you can start producing at low cost your own renewable energy. And this is an area we see a lot of women are interested in, because it doesn't need high upfront capital investment. These can be smaller investments, and they can immediately start reducing your energy bill. And the women are also real players then in this field, because that, I think, is a very important area that we do see also there a big gender gap. Women have still less access to capital to make bigger investments for sustainable consumption. So these are some of the examples we're working on in our network, and I'll be happy to give further examples if that's useful. Claudia, back to you.
That is fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sascha. So fascinating and so interesting to see the work done at the same time on the ground, with the consumers, but also, with the legislators. So like playing that, connecting role. I was wondering, listening to you, when you mentioned the campaign in France, workshops, Ma Maison, Ma Santé, done with family and young parents. So do you have young men as well participating, or would it be or do you still see they are more like skewed toward women being more interested in this type of solutions?
Absolutely. I mean, the majority of the participants are women.
Okay.
We still really need to try and find ways to interest young men in our topics, and that's one of our challenges, and we hope to be working on that more and more. Already, just to get young men interested in ecofeminism, is sometimes a barrier. But of course, for us, a feminist, doesn't matter your gender. A feminist is someone who stands for equal rights, and an ecofeminist is someone who stands for sustainable development and a healthy planet. So everybody can be an ecofeminist, and we would be happy to have lots of men join us as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sascha. I'd like to now, bring the focus on Argentina, and Claudia Collado. Adelco has been working closely also with women communities for a long time. And one of the gendered aspects of the marketplace that you have observed is the higher pricing of green or sustainable products that are targeted at women, the so-called pink tag. So tell us a little bit about the work that you've been doing to support women consumers against this practice. And for the audience, so Claudia, as a reminder, will be speaking in Spanish. So for non-Spanish speakers, we can hear a live translation by connecting onto the English channel. Claudia.
Muchas gracias, Claudia. La idea es contarles cuál es nuestra experiencia en Adelco, en lo que nosotros hacemos en nuestros talleres de capacitación. En estos talleres nosotros brindamos la educación necesaria para que se pueda elaborar un presupuesto, para que se pueda hacer o realizar compras responsables, para que se puedan comprar productos más saludables, para que las personas que asisten a los talleres puedan modificar hábitos alimentarios. De hecho, en los talleres, en general, las mujeres cocinan y de esa manera vamos cambiando los productos y haciendo que se consuma de una forma más responsable y además se consuman productos saludables. ¿Por qué todo esto? Porque consideramos que tanto la industria como la publicidad en general inducen a quienes son las mujeres, y lo que nosotros nos damos cuenta es que las mujeres son las que toman en realidad las decisiones en su familia y en sus casas en relación a las compras que se deben hacer sobre alimentos, sobre medicamentos, o a la contratación de servicios o el uso de los servicios básicos. Entonces, la industria, de alguna manera, y la publicidad las inducen a consumir productos que a lo mejor son, por ejemplo, más light, ¿no? Y en realidad lo que nos damos cuenta es que son productos procesados o ultraprocesados, no son productos saludables y por supuesto esos productos que se muestran como más saludables tienen un precio más elevado. Nosotros tenemos una realidad, es que tenemos un nivel de obesidad increíble, no solamente en mujeres, sino también en sus hijos. Tenemos un nivel de obesidad en niños muy importante y no se considera a la obesidad como una enfermedad, y lo es. Esta enfermedad trae aparejada diabetes, por ejemplo. Entonces, el hecho de que se vean inducidas a comprar productos procesados o ultraprocesados hacen que impacte directamente en la salud de las mujeres y de su familia. Esta es más o menos la realidad que nosotros nos encontramos en los talleres en los que trabajamos. También nos damos cuenta que cuando van a comprar productos de higiene, bueno, recién se habló, ¿no?, de productos que contienen muchos tóxicos y que tienen un packaging o publicidades que entusiasman a las mujeres a comprar o a decidir por comprar esos productos, cuando en realidad tienen un precio más elevado y son productos tóxicos. Entonces, hay una realidad, ustedes lo llaman pin tax, nosotros precios más elevados a aquellos productos que consumen las mujeres, que en general se da en productos de higiene personal, por ejemplo. Es decir, en Argentina, yo oía recién en relación a lo que se decía de productos menstruales. Una copa menstrual en Argentina está como promedio por encima de los $30. Entonces es un producto que no es alcanzable por todos y la verdad es que no solamente se trata de productos de higiene personal. Cuando vamos a comprar una crema, seguramente va a ser más cara si es para mujer que para hombre. En realidad, cualquier perfume que podamos adquirir en Argentina siempre va a ser más caro para las mujeres que para los hombres. Entonces, la industria, de alguna manera, nosotros vemos que va a un paso muy lento en esto de querer lograr precios neutrales. De alguna manera, nosotros también lo que tratamos de ver con esto es que no hay campañas de educación para las mujeres ni para cualquier género, digamos, no hay campañas de educación. Entonces, por ejemplo, vemos una publicidad sobre maquillaje, porque también se quieren ver lindas, y nosotros en estos talleres también hemos dado no solamente talleres de etiquetado para que puedan diferenciar y realizar compras más responsables, sino también en relación al maquillaje, porque se quieren ver lindas, pero resulta ser que los maquillajes que son más accesibles o que pueden comprar o que tienen un precio más bajo son los más tóxicos, influyen directamente en la salud. Entonces, hicimos una campaña que se llamó La sombra del maquillaje, donde pudimos enseñar cuáles eran los productos que debían comprar y que no siempre el producto que la industria o la publicidad está indicando que compren es el más saludable. Nos pasó con un producto que había para la limpieza de la cara, del rostro, que estaban utilizando, y con unos productos para los ojos como rímel y tal, que hacía que nosotros descubriéramos que tenían algunas enfermedades y no entendíamos muy bien por qué. Y era por los productos que estaban utilizando. Y nos asociamos con otra fundación para darles sobre este tema algunos tips importantes, y se dieron cuenta que con el jabón que lavaban su ropa, que es un jabón blanco muy, pero muy accesible, con un precio muy accesible, era con lo que se tenían que lavar el rostro, lavar su cara y no consumir el producto caro que estaban consumiendo. Entonces, eso nos llevó también a que esto tuviera un impacto social, porque muchas se entusiasmaron y terminaron queriendo aprender a maquillar a otras para poder tener un trabajo en relación a este tema. Otra de las cosas que me gustaría señalar es que a nosotros nos pasó en estos talleres la incorporación de los hombres. Nos parece muy importante, esto nos lo demostró nuestra experiencia. Cada vez que se sumaban hombres a los talleres de cocina, donde se trataban otros temas, obviamente, todo alrededor de conseguir una vida más sostenible, los talleres se tornaban mucho más interesantes, las mujeres se mostraban muy entusiasmadas porque para ellas transmitir esto en sus hogares no era un tema fácil. Entonces, yo diría, para inspirar a quienes quieran llevar adelante este tipo de trabajos, que se animen a incorporar hombres siempre y cuando realicen un trabajo desde su asociación o desde sus fundaciones, porque es importante para lograr un trabajo más integral.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Claudia. Wonderful initiatives that illustrate not only consumer protection, but a real social impact. Really inspiring. I'd like to ask also Caroline Hammarstedt Nuss, like, what is your perspective from the work in Sweden? How is consumption gendered there as well? What has been your observation?
Thank you, Claudia. It's a pleasure being with you all today. So I just want to start by saying that the Swedish Consumer Agency is the main consumer protection authority in Sweden, but there are other authorities as well in charge of sector-specific legislation, such as food, medication, and chemicals. But we work with consumer protection. And so in my work, we see that gendered consumption patterns, it's a reality, and it's important to acknowledge both the consequences that it may have, as well as understanding how it may affect consumers in different ways. So consumers' decisions that, what can I say, that are not well-founded, it may cause both physical harm, it can also cause financial harm. So at the agency, we can see that there are gender-specific differences, risks, and opportunities. And when we have investigated how consumers rate their own ability on certain markets, we can see that, of course, there are many markets that we consider to be gender neutral, so to speak, where we see that they sort of rate their ability the same way. But we have markets that really show that there's a difference in how women and men perceive their ability. So when it comes to the financial products, for example, savings, stocks and bonds, we can see that men rate their own ability higher. They trust that they're going to make a well-grounded decision. And at the same time, we can see that women rate their ability much lower for those products and on those markets. But at the same time, they rate their own ability higher when it comes to markets pertaining to physical appearance, households such as furniture, interior design, shoes, clothes, hygiene products, and beauty products. And we have done a study investigating the areas of aesthetical surgery, such as both surgery, but also injections. And the agency has identified that young women have an overall higher risk in relation to marketing, and especially picture-based, and that they are more susceptible and vulnerable to influencer marketing on aesthetical surgery. And, this is one of the things that I mentioned earlier, that maybe perhaps, due to commercial practices, women or men can actually be at a higher or lower risk of physical or financial harm. So I have talked now a little bit about just like gendered consumption in general, but I also want to mention a bit about sustainability. So in 2022, the Nordic Information on Gender they released a research overview where they had looked at the topics of consumption, gender, and climate. And some of the things that they brought up in that research overview is very interesting. They said that norms around femininity and masculinity tends to influence both attitudes around climate change, defined as whether or not a person engages in behaviors that have positive or negative consequences for the climate. But they also stated that interest in sustainability seems to be related to feminine ideas, such as norms of caretaking. So at the same time as caretaking responsibility seems to promote a sustainability perspective in consumption for both women and men. So of course, we can see a shift maybe in how women and men perceive gender norms, and we can see that maybe it's shifting a bit. But at the same time, we see that women are much more, more responsibility is placed on women to sort of engage in sustainable consumption due to, being more of a caretaker and taking care of the household. And what is important with this, I have to say, is regardless if that's how it is, and regardless if women and men maybe consume in different ways, it needs to be taken into consideration that are we valuing the consumption differently, and also do we have policies taking this into consideration, which we will talk more about later. But I do want to finish up by saying that in 2021, the agency, the Swedish Consumer Agency, we did a study on where we looked at significant barriers to achieve a more sustainable consumption. And we also included behavioral insights to sort of, have a broader perspective on this. And we saw, for example, that consumers having difficulties to comprehend and understand all the information given to them. And what was clear from that study was that consumer information cannot be the only solution to a more sustainable consumption. It showed that like a broad supply of more sustainable products to affordable prices is much more important than, the information part. But as I mentioned earlier, social norms also play a role in this. But we are currently doing the study over again. So we're looking at the same thing, and we're gonna hopefully finish it up by April this year. So I think that was about it from me this time.
Thank you, Caroline. Super interesting. And also we will get back to that, also the importance of marketing and how now that it's digital and personalized can reinforce some of the stereotyping in a more subtle way, as you explained to me, by targeting women and men with specific content, which is stereotyped in itself. So really harmful and really preoccupying. You touched upon also already a little bit on the second macro question, which is what are the key barriers that different genders face in accessing, engaging with sustainable products and practices. You talked a little bit about that, and I'd like also Marielle Venstra then to touch upon this. You have significant data, particularly about the energy sector and how it lacks diversification. Tell us all about it.
Yes, thank you, Claudia, and thank you all my fellow speakers, because you touched upon a lot of these different elements, because in that sense, I'm not a consumer specialist, but I work on the intersection of gender and energy transition, and especially the role of women as energy consumers. Too often we still see in products and projects and policies talking about energy transitions that we don't take what I would call a more heterogeneous aspect of the consumer. We still talk about the one box fits all assumption on the consumer as well. We're all having the same needs the same access, the same rights, the same affordability. And I think, as the previous speakers also stipulated, there's a variety, of course, in when we look at care responsibilities. We know that from through the gendered role, many women, and especially women living alone, are taking more care responsibilities than men, even men living alone. Because for example, depending family members like children, grandparents, community members, and many of these care responsibilities come what I would call with an energy intensive task, like doing the laundry, cooking, we need sustainable energy sources for. It still is all over the world, and also in the what we would call the global north in Europe, that there are many people, and hence many women, are using biofuels and firewood to cook and to heat their homes. And we all know not only the environmental issues that comes with using firewood, but moreover the health issues that come with indoor air pollution. Every 11 seconds, there's someone dying from the impact of indoor air pollution, and many of them are women and children who are depending on firewood because there's no other option for them to use for the energy needs. We also know that when we look at the consumption of energy transition products, things like heat pumps, solar panels, electric vehicles, that comes with a very capital intensive choice. No? We need to have access to capital in order to make those upfront investments, although there are policies to ensure that there are taxes and subsidies and grants that are reducing these energy transition costs. However, the upfront costs are often with the consumers, and we know because of the gender income gap and gender pay gap that there are many women that are not eligible or don't have that upfront investment cost. If we not even look at home owners and land and tenants, we also see that there are quite a lot of women that are not homeowners among the tenants, so people who are renting their place. We see a majority of women. We also see there in differences in household composition. Often these are single mothers living with children, or elderly women living alone, often because of their spouse died. And the good thing of being a woman is that you often live longer than men, but that also comes with, we live longer with a smaller income, so we live longer in these kind of circumstances. However, if we look at who makes the decisions in energy transition and who is trying to implement a more what we call demand-driven approach in energy transition, they really need to understand what are the needs, what are the rights, what is the affordability, what are the aspects that we need to take into consideration in the uptake of energy transition projects and products. And there we talk about how is these different groups resonating with each other. And just the Dutch statistics brings it's very clear that there is an imbalance in that field. 50% of the energy consumers are female. If we look at energy vulnerable households, so those who are struggling to pay their energy bill on time, roughly 70% of these households are female-headed households. But if you look who works in the energy sector, in the Netherlands, it's only a mere 23% of the energy workers are female. If we look at the technical positions, it's even 7%. And if we look at who makes the decisions, so who is in the boardrooms, who is the energy policy makers, only 4% are women. So hence, we need a lot of advocacy and training and information and awareness raising at all these different levels in the energy transition to understand energy consumption and the gendered impacts of that, to ensure that there are sustainable energy programs for all. And as there are many projects now increasing this awareness raising, but also to ensure that there's a more general access to services. Already my colleague Sascha from WECF mentioned the projects on what we call prosumers. Those consumers will also produce their own energy, affording to have a couple of solar panels for their own electricity needs. We do see a lot of uptake there among small energy communities. There are a couple of energy communities fully owned by women that are very successful in also and translating all the more technical savviness that comes with this technology uptake towards a more broader audience. With the energy prices peaks, and especially in Europe, we see more emphasis on energy poverty and energy solidarity to mitigate energy poverty. There's more funding also coming from the European Union to make energy more affordable for a wider range of consumers and households. So I think we're on having the right momentum to ensure that the access to sustainable energy services are becoming more available and more affordable for a wider group of consumers. So thank you, Claudia.
Fantastic, Marielle. And I'd like to stay with you for the last macro question, which is basically moving on to how can policymakers and businesses ensure that sustainability actions are inclusive and equitable for all genders? So Marielle, you have worked with a lot of institutions. You have made recommendations to the EU Parliament about introducing a gender lens on the energy crisis. Tell us about this process and its outcomes.
Yes, thank you for that question, Claudia. And in that sense, no, it's not something I do alone. Also, the work of Sascha from the WECF, she left the call because she is in New York at the Committee on the Status of Women last year. We were there together. I was part of the Dutch delegation. And we do see that since the energy transition and climate change mitigation actions are so extremely important at all European policy levels. There's the alarm outside. I hope it's not disturbing you too much. But the alarm bells are not only ringing here outside, but also at the policy level, because we do see that the transition is so crucial that the uptake of wider groups of the population is extremely important. And what I do see is there is, however, quite a gap between what's happening at the local level and what's happening at the international and European level. At the international and European level, there's a lot of momentum going on. Think about the Sustainable Development Goals, the Sustainable Energy for All program, the European Green Deal, and all other consumer rights initiatives. But these international negotiations and conversations need to be implemented at the national level. And the national level needs to support what's happening at the ground, at the local actions and the local activities. And what I see is that at the international level, there's this awareness and the push of new regulations and directives. And at the local level, there's a lot of action going on, and there's a lot of programs and policies and projects, very successful, collaborating with a lot of stakeholders at the local level. But at the national level, many of these initiatives are a bit squeezed. And the national level should support the local actions way more, way better in breaking silos between different policies, breaking the silos in funding, and support the local actions in a way also to be more compliant to what's happening at the international level. So it's often a call at the national level to support what's happening on the ground and to support international collaborations in that sense.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And, Caroline, in this sense, how can you follow up? What can you tell us about the work of the UNCTAD Informal Working Group on Consumer Protections, of which you are a member. I know that there's been, specific tools that have been created exactly for this purpose to support policymakers.
Thank you for the question, Claudia. Yes, so the UNCTAD's informal working group on consumer protection and gender was installed into 2022. So this is the third year it's going. And so inspired by the OECD toolkit on gender inclusive competition, we have been working on a checklist for the member states, but also different consumer organizations and people, agencies working with consumer protection to use, to work with how to introduce gender into policy making, but also how to better gather sex disaggregated data, gender disaggregated data, which we know we need more of because we don't know enough. But also the checklist encourages members to, think about where they can apply a gender lens and also how they can, find more information to work with. It's about incorporating gender into compliance and advocacy, basically. It's been a really fantastic group of people, expertise from different parts of the world, academia, and so forth. And it's really truly a great experience to work together. And so we really hope that we continue the work.
Great, and we look forward to following and once the checklist is released to have it available for all the stakeholders that are present here as well. I'd like to conclude, I'd like to give the floor to the three of you, 1 minute each. What would be your call to action today for the people that are, following us? We have been seeing that, we've been exposing what I feel is just like the tip of the iceberg. Like it's really, we're really just starting to understand what are the complexity and the differences, the gendered implications in the marketplace. So what would be, in less than a minute, your call to action? What is one thing that you want people to really start thinking about or doing in this space? And I'd like to start maybe with Claudia Collado.
Sí, por supuesto. Creo que lo principal sería trabajar para derribar las barreras que nos pone tanto la industria como el Estado. Nosotros tenemos una realidad en un país muy grande con mujeres que viven en ciudades y mujeres en zonas rurales, donde la diferencia, por ejemplo, de los servicios o de los productos que consumen es diametralmente diferente y con precios diferentes que tienen que pagar. Entonces, la industria debería hacer un esfuerzo por ofrecer productos o servicios de otra manera y de una manera más neutra para todos. Y por otro lado, yo diría que hay que trabajar en influyendo en las autoridades, haciendo advocacy para que las autoridades se interesen por realizar campañas de educación. ¿Por qué? Porque creemos que desde la educación es desde donde se puede llegar a tener una vida más sostenible, y realmente no hay campañas de educación masivas donde uno pueda encontrar herramientas. Y lo que hacemos las asociaciones de consumidores es muy importante, pero sería importante que el Estado tomara las herramientas que nosotros utilizamos y las pudiera llevar en campañas, porque tienen medios públicos en donde hacerlo. Nosotros venimos insistiendo con eso, y también, por supuesto, es muy importante hablar con legisladores, que son los que en definitiva pueden llegar a hacer o a modificar y realizar cambios en todos los aspectos que se necesitan.
Excellent. Thank you, Claudia. Mariella, your 1 minute.
Oh, my 1 minute. Well, just to add to that, I think it's also very important to work on literacy skills. Now, if I look from an energy perspective, energy bills and energy tariffs are becoming more and more complex. At the national level, we demand more transparency of energy tariffs building up. But if we look at the bills, I don't even understand what kind of costs there are involved. So hence, really taking into consideration that there's a huge majority of the population that don't have functional literacy skills. Now, they might read and write, but don't understand the call for action. And not even mentioning digital skills. Now, with smart meters and energy transition that is becoming more and more digitalized, we should acknowledge that not everyone has these digital skills or have access to digital instruments in order to get their information.
Absolutely, Marielle. Thank you very much. And Caroline, your last call to action for the audience. You're on mute.
I'm sorry, thank you, Claudia. So I do want to say that there are plenty of digital commercial practices that consumer protection authorities needs to work with. So at our agency, we have been focusing on, for example, the exploitation of consumer data, the effects of data-driven and personalized marketing based on how and what we do online, and in particular, how it affects different vulnerable groups and consumers. And we see that, for example, this may target women, and by targeting women with marketing related to sustainability, we're going to sort of manifest the gender norms that we already have. And one last thing I just want to say is that to actively work to avoid placing the responsibility on the individual consumer when it comes to sustainable lifestyle, we need to work with policy making, and also to make sure that the consumers know how to, and that they want to, and also that they can do better for the sustainable goals. Thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Caroline. Thank you to all of our panelists for sharing the depth of their work and the research. As I said, it feels like we just exposed the tip of the iceberg, and there's still significant work ahead to support women consumers toward a just and sustainable lifestyle transition. We hope that the session was useful and that will stimulate all those attending to consider these issues, to consider gender in everything that they do and in their respective lines of work, and to take action following the advice of our three panelists. Thank you very much for being with us.